started a new company, Dark. So Dark is our attempt to take all of the accidental complexity out of building software. We started with the premise that building software is just way, way, way too hard.
It's Launch Darkly's 4-year anniversary. When I started doing the podcast with you, I think we were 4 people.
You were 4 people and you're 30 people?
50.
Hi, I'm Paul Bigger, founder of Circle CI.
I'm Edith, CEO and co-founder at Launch Darkly.
And you're listening to Be Continuous, a podcast about continuous delivery and software development.
You can get in touch with us anytime at our Twitter handle, @ContinuousCast.
The show is brought to you by Heavybit. To learn more, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.
Hey, Paul.
Hello.
I heard you started Dark.
Yes, I started a new company, darklang.com.
Yeah, tell me about it.
So Dark is our attempt to take all of the accidental complexity out of building software. So we started with the premise that building software is just way, way, way too hard.
Yeah.
And we looked at all the various different points of that complexity. And the major 4 that we came up with was infrastructure complexity, like things like Kubernetes and Docker and AWS and that kind of thing. API complexity, deployment complexity, and then code complexity itself. So that's everything from syntax errors to using Git to fixing your editor, all that sort of thing. And we speculate that we can remove all of those areas.
All of them?
All those areas of complexity.
I thought you were about to say, and then we decided to focus on one.
So, I mean, there's certainly a question about the order of which we validate things and how we cut scope to get to market. But those are the 4 areas of complexity that we're looking at. The end result or the initial end result is a sort of a holistic editor, programming language, and platform as a service, or hosting and infrastructure compiler, perhaps.
I have so many questions, but how did you come up with an MVP given such a broad space?
So the initial MVP I made about 18 months ago, and it took about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So that was a thing that I had a bunch of ideas. And what I needed to prove to myself was, is it possible to write software in this sort of metaphor? Mm. So I built something that roughly, I built a blog with it. And it wasn't a very advanced blog. It was just is there a metaphor with which I can store data and do computation on it in a way that's like zero deployment and very fast to edit? And it was buggy and all that sort of thing, but it was it was fine. And it proved that I could do it. And it took 2 weeks, but really it was 800 lines of Python, 800 lines of Elm. It was not very complicated.
Why do you switch from Clojure?
Why did I switch from Clojure? So I think...
And Elm and Python.
So we're still using Elm today. We switched from Python, and the original MVP was in Python, but I found I struggled to grow it. Mm. And that very much for the same reason as we switched from Python, which is that I kind of believe in static types. Mm. So we're building it in OCaml, and I think that the result is not going to be that it's all done in OCaml, but when you're a very early stage in a startup and you don't know what you're building, you often have to completely change everything often. And the overhead of writing tests to prove that your code works is very high. And having that layer of compiler checked or type system checked thing is incredibly valuable.
You felt it gave you guardrails?
Exactly, yeah. I felt a lot of security, and we experienced a thing, and I've been coding for a while now. I kind of know that if I fit within the guardrails, my program is probably going to work in the first time in most cases.
So the team started off with you and a prototype, but how big is the team now? And
we're 4 people now.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, big changes. And we're interviewing heavily for 5, 6, and 7. So we're looking for a designer, front-end engineer, and an infrastructure engineer. But yeah, we're 4 people now. So there's my co-founder, Ellen. There's our engineer, Ian, who has listened to every single podcast we have ever made, which is a real struggle because he knows the ends of all my stories.
Does he ever tell you the story?
Oh yeah. No, it's do you remember you said on this podcast? I was nope, don't remember that at all.
I started to try to tell a story to somebody at work, and they're like, "Oh, we heard this already."
Yeah. So that's every story I tell at work now. It's very irritating. And Steffi, who does operations.
So it's funny. I met Ian, and I'm giving him a shout out because he's such a charming, nice guy.
He's lovely.
It's funny because he's from Ireland too.
We went to the same university, but 10 years apart.
Yeah, and it's funny. Also, now that you outed, he said he felt like he was a different generation than you.
I think that's probably true. The generation that I grew up in was the one in which Ireland had no money.
Yeah.
And sort of the Celtic Tiger came along. It's what we called the period of prosperity between the early 90s and 2008. And yeah, you're coming 10 years later. You're much, you grew up through a lot of that prosperity instead of sort of seeing it as an adult.
It's funny because that's exactly the way he described it. So I don't know if that's the way you described it to him or that you both
No,
independently.
actually, I'd never heard him say that. So that's...
Yeah, he used the phrase Celtic Tiger, that he was the generation that grew up with more prosperity.
Yeah.
How do you feel like that's shaped your outlook in starting a company, to have grown up?
Oh, that's very interesting. I think one of the things that matters to me, and I think I'm very much a millennial in this sense, is that I don't so much care about money. I mean, I care about not having none. I think millennials are a generation that are defined by like a need of experience over status, or people who spend their money on experiences versus status.
But I would say Ian is more millennial generation than you.
Yeah. So I think I'm definitely within the cultural definition. I'm also within the technical definition. It's apparently kids who started in 1980 to 1995 or something along those lines.
Who were born then?
Who were born in those years. But yeah, certainly culturally, I'm a millennial. And I believe in I mean, this is why I'm doing another startup, right? I want to build a thing I need to exist in the world.
Yeah. You just felt this need to create again.
Yeah, so after I left Circle C, I spent about 18 months doing nothing.
Well, you podcasted with me occasionally.
We podcasted. That was basically the only technical thing. Occasionally talking to founders and trying to help them, but mostly, I went to Costa Rica. I did a road trip. I moved to New York. I did the Recurse Center, which is really great. And I thought about what am I doing next. And every idea that I had, everything I wanted to build, I really was lamenting the fact that I would have to go and use all these subpar tools, and I would have to go and learn, say, Kubernetes or learn AWS, and that I'd have to, I felt I couldn't build a small company because the amount of infrastructure and overhead you need to have your code work is too high for one person.
Yeah, I mean, there's echoes here of that post you wrote called "This is the Future."
Yes, very, very, very much so, and I included that in all material that was discussing Dark in the early days. But yeah, there's way too much stuff, and there's way too much stuff you need to know, and infrastructure, which was the subject of It's the Future, is crazy, but the front end is crazy as well.
Yeah.
And there's just an explosion of tooling, and everything makes incremental improvements, and all of that incremental improvement overall increases complexity rather than decreasing it.
Yeah, I remember when you could just hack together an HTML page and a backend.
Yep. And that was it. But people's expectations are much higher. There's a lot more people on the internet now. The speed at which you need to move is incredibly high. And that combined with the expectations and needing to work in a team to be able to do that, those are a couple of the major factors of the complexity.
Yeah. So how this is so fascinating. So like there's so many different directions, but what's it like to work with somebody 10 years younger?
I don't know. I feel like I've been working with people much younger than me and also older than me and also the same age as me. At Circle, we had certainly a lot of us at the start were sort of in the early family age, I would say, like late 20s, early 30s. But we hired some incredibly smart 20-year-olds, some very experienced people in their 40s and 50s. I think actually it's. There isn't a fundamental difference between people of those various ages. We did once interview a 16-year-old, and I think that was too far. But I think once you have sort of valued team members and you listen to what they have to say, you don't necessarily need to do what they say. But good ideas come from anywhere, and often I could not predict where the good points were going to come from.
Yeah, I mean, so this is your second time founding a startup. Mm-hmm. How?
This is my fourth time.
Oh my gosh, I forget.
Yeah, no.
No, because we talked about these other ones. All right, so this is your fourth time.
Fourth time, yeah.
How are you trying to be more intentional about culture and hiring?
So I think one of the big things is that we're pushing a lot on being an inclusive company. I think that's very different from what we did before. I was on Charity Majors and Rachel Chalmers have a podcast on the Heavybit network. I don't know if it's out or coming out.
You did that already?
Yeah, I did an episode on that.
Well, you're not recording with me, and you're recording with them.
I'm so sorry, Edith. I feel like there's some sort of infidelity going on here.
You've been saying you're too busy to tape, and in full disclosure, I was on Glenn's podcast.
Oh, nice. So I talked on their podcast a lot about this, but that was not a thing I saw the value of in 2011, and have since learned how wrong I was. And I think it's important to really look at that in hiring, which is something that we're doing at the moment, or have been doing since the company started. I think one of the other major things is that just we wrote down a set of values. Yeah. From the very start, when me and Ellen started working together, we worked out what our roles were. We worked out what our values were, and it's not that they were set in stone. Like, we redid our values when we had employees. Yep. But what was different about it is that we wanted to make sure that we were on the same page and that we were building the same company. Yeah. And I think it was like Eisenhower or someone said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. Mm-hmm. And with Circle, we just got down to it. We knew we had something to build, and we never discussed or thought about values or process or any of that sort of thing. And I'm finding that things are going a lot more, I wouldn't necessarily say smoothly, but everything feels smoother as a result of just sort of like having a plan, knowing what we're doing, even if we change that relatively frequently.
Yeah, I mean, I thought something was really interesting is you told me that you're already going to founders therapy.
Oh yeah, no, I'll be right on the air about that. I think everyone should go to therapy, but I think all co-founders should go to therapy. Like, therapy is the best. So we started working with a company called Inner Space.
Oh, Joe Greenstein's.
So we work with Samira.
Oh, okay.
But Inner Space is great, and they do things like tea groups for. We haven't done the tea groups together, but they run tea group. How was it?
Well, you finish your story, and then I'll
Okay. So I felt that from the very start, when I was talking to co-founders, I was like, I think co-founder therapy is really important, and that we haven't worked together, we're going to need to do this, and Ellen was on board, and we did it from the second we raised money. First thing we did was we went to therapy, and I think it's one of those things that you have to do from when you're not having problems. It's to make the marriage analogy. If you go to therapy when you're having problems, like you're unlikely to save it. But if you start going when everything's good, and you learn to communicate, and you learn to raise issues and through nonviolent language and that kind of thing, and then you can be much better partners than if you don't.
What's your cadence for the therapy?
It's about every 2 weeks.
And you feel like it's helped your...
Next week. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
It's the same with regular therapy, but I always feel great coming out of it, and I feel like problems have gotten taken care of, and it's almost like the feeling you get when you have tickets in your Trello and you move it into the done column.
Do you feel yourself looking forward to it, or is it more like at the dentist?
No, I feel myself looking forward to it a lot.
And I say that because my dentist is always super excited to see me. I'm just like, dude, I am not super excited to see you at all.
I love my dentist.
You love your dentist?
Yeah. So I have a new dentist who, she turns it around in 20 minutes. Like, I walk in the building and I walk out of the building 20 minutes later.
And your therapy is like that too?
No. Therapy takes a full hour. And I mean, co-founder therapy especially is very expensive.
Yeah.
So you definitely want to be getting your money's worth.
Expensive, what's a ballpark?
I don't want to say exactly, but general management or executive coaching, it's the same sort of price, and I think that tends to be in the $500 an hour range. Jeez. Yeah. Do you have a coach?
So I do not have a coach. I did do my first tea group.
Okay.
So I got accepted to this program called Leaders in Tech, which is really interesting.
Okay.
It's
what's that?
It's 24 people. And it's a year-long program where it's basically peer group / coaching to be better people, better executives.
Yeah.
So you have to have, I think, done at least a Series B or have a certain valuation. And they said a lot of people applied, and they filtered the people they thought would get the most out of it.
Nice.
It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never done a tea group before.
I hear it like bears all the emotions for everyone.
Well, the thing is, I didn't know what a tea group was.
Mm-hmm. I don't either.
So, like, I just went to this thing expecting it was like your typical like CEO thing where like, you know,
we're going to be talk. There's going to be some canapes.
Yeah. And instead, like, the tissues were there.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It was like me, the hard charging CEO meets the group. Mm-hmm. And it was.
But you had fun?
The joke about me was they're like, you came in charging, ready to like moderate the therapy group and therapy everybody to death. And then like once you calm down, like it was great.
Nice.
But at the beginning, I was like, okay, you're done talking with your feelings. Who's going to talk about their feelings next? Because I moderate a lot of dinners, and I was like, okay, I don't need to moderate this. We can
we can talk.
We could talk without me. It was fun. So it sounds like you're being more intentional.
Mm-hmm. A lot more intentional about how I work together with my co-founder, how the company is set up. We were also much more intentional about how we raise money.
Yeah.
In Circle, raised 50K. A year later, raised $1.5 million. A year later, raised $6 million. And each of those were very much on the the angel, and then the seed round, and then the Series A based on certain traction and whatever. And we sat down at the start with Dark, and we made a plan and said, what can we do? What is the right way to do this? And we came up with the raise 500K plan, the raise 2 million plan, the raise 3.5 million plan, the raise 5 million plan, the raise 10 million plan. And then we looked at what can we actually achieve on the basis of where we are. What do we need to get to the next stage? And we narrowed it down basically to two plans: the 500K plan and the 3.5 million plan. More than that was too much money and would have been too dilutive. The 2 million plan, which I think initially seemed the most natural, we worried, like when we drew out a timeline of where we would be, or the team we could hire, where we would be, we worried that left us in sort of no man's land.
Yeah.
It would give us 18 months, and obviously if you have 18 months, you need to start fundraising 6 months beforehand. So that means we'd have a year. And that means we'd have to basically double down on like the best idea within a year and then try to raise off that. And I think that with the benefit of hindsight, like that would have been possible, but it looked like the riskiest plan. So we looked at the 3.5 million, and then we looked at the 500K. And the risk with the 3.5 million is that it's a lot of money, and to have a good dilution, the implied valuation is quite high relative to how people were doing seeds. People were looking at 12 million post money in most things, and that's very dilutive to raise 3.5 million in that situation. So essentially, we thought it was the best plan, and we tested the market out, and the market was receptive. And so not all of the market was receptive. So we definitely talked to a lot of people who were not as receptive, and we tried a couple of different plans before we hit our stride. But I think in 2 months we talked to 160 investors.
Wow.
And I think that's the major difference between being between the first time and the second time. Like the first time, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know who to talk to, you don't know. Every lead seems like it's going to win. We could afford to be selective. There's a couple of people that we talked to. In particular, one thing I saw was like VCs who wouldn't look Ellen in the eye, and they would ask a question. Ellen would be the right person to answer the question. She'd answer the question, and then they would ask the follow-up question, still looking at me, asking me instead of asking. It was very frustrating, and doubly so for her. We had the ability to be a little more selective, but at the same time, when it takes a lot of checks to get to 3.5 million.
In full disclosure, I am a very tiny investor in Dark.
You are our favorite investor in Dark.
I'm your favorite that's doing a podcast with you right now.
So, I mean, one thing we did was we made room for small investors. I think the smallest check we took was 1,000. And like at Circle CI, the smallest we took was like 10K, and that was a stretch. And we mostly took 25. But we made a lot of room for 1, 5, 10K investments in Dark, because one, we had a method of handling the cap table, which is the angel list syndicate. So we funneled all the investors through, or all the angel investors through an angel list syndicate, which made cap table management significantly easier. And then we needed that social proof from people like yourself, and John invested,
John Kodamal, my co-founder.
John Kodamal, Russ from Rainforest invested, Andrew from PagerDuty invested, Greg from OpenAI invested. There's a lot of people in the space. I feel bad now that I mentioned 5 when there's in fact 25. Like 25 names that you would know, and so we put them on a slide when we were fundraising. It's like, and these are the angels who are investing, and they're like, oh, I know like 6 of them. And it's like, you should talk to them.
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm definitely in the low side of those numbers you just named, but I did get pinged by people.
Right, of course.
They'd be like, we saw your name on a slide. Is this true? And I would be like, yeah, of course, I believe in Ellen and Paul.
Yeah. God, could you imagine if we put names on the slide that weren't true?
People do that sometimes. Like So now Launch Darkly, people put our logo on slides sometimes. And sometimes it's somebody we'll use once we don't use it anymore. And I'm just like,
yeah, that's a risk.
Yeah, I'm like, no, we don't use them anymore. Here's why.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you should really take us off your slides.
Yeah, this is not a good idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that sort of social proof was absolutely necessary. And we eventually put together 3.5 million over, I guess, a month and a half, I would say, maybe a month from sort of hitting, you do a couple of experiments when you're fundraising. It's like, are we going to go, is it going to be Series A investors? Are they going to write these checks? And we tried a couple of different venues, and then we sort of hit our stride with angels and funds writing 250K checks.
So for those listening at home, do you think this is something that worked for you because of, you were a 4th-time founder, Ellen had come out of some prestigious startups? Yeah,
no, absolutely. We couldn't have done it without the... Now, I mean, I see people do this, and I don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
Like certainly, we don't like to tell a bigger story than we are. Like, we like a good narrative, but we're not people to hype and to pitch and to pit investors off against each other to invest in the new hot round or that sort of thing. But you definitely see that sort of thing go on a bit. And we also weren't coming out of like Y Combinator, which I think is a thing that often justifies those valuations. But I think as well, it's not something that we could have put together without sort of a little bit of prestige behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I still mentor when I go to Clojure and Web Summit. It was really cool this year. Was a bunch of South American startups.
Oh, lovely!
So from like Chile, Guatemala, Brazil, which were so cool.
Yeah,
but like everything I told them was with this huge grain of salt. I was like, I know the American market.
Yeah.
I don't know if this will work in your home
I mean,
market.
I tell them all move to San Francisco.
But I don't think so. Well, I guess it did happen for you. I mean, you were an Irish person. You moved here and
that's
you
what
raised...
I did.
Well, cool. So you raised the money. You set up your culture. How did you... You started doing something very interesting, which was you had what do you call it? Like a developer in residence or a hacker in residence?
We called it an EIR, and it's unclear whether we meant engineer in residence or entrepreneur in residence, but it was intended to be a bit of both. So Dark is a programming language, and it's an editor, and it's hosting, and we're doing all those things. And as a result, it's very, very broad, but you need market validation, and you need market validation as soon as possible. So instead of trying to launch it or something like that, because it is not polished, it is enough to prove out certain concepts and certain ideas that we had, but we didn't know how to prioritize all the thousands of polished things that we could put on it. So we had this idea. Why don't we get someone to build their actual startup in Dark?
Cool.
And because we didn't want to we wanted someone to really be doing this. We didn't want to find 50 people and try to have them stick with it and what we ended up doing is saying we'll pay you. So we're paying our $3,000 a month.
Wow.
The CAC is super high, but who knows what the payback period will be. We just posted. We posted on Hacker News. We posted on Twitter. A couple people retweeted and that sort of thing because it looked really interesting. And in the end, we had about 30 applicants, and some of them were doing things that we weren't ready for. Like they needed more scale, more real time, more video, that kind of thing. But we finally came across this guy, and I don't want to say his name because I don't have permission. But he's building a small startup, bootstrapped, has a bunch of customers, is building a new product in that. and didn't want to really maintain it. And that's the promise of Dark, that you know, the amount of work that you have to do to write and to maintain a back-end application is low. And he's helping us prioritize and tell us where the bugs are that really bother him. And he comes to our office every day and he tells us what's wrong. And we triage in the morning, and we re-triage like high-level priorities every week. At the moment, it's too slow, so we're scaling some things and optimizing some things that we hadn't optimized until this point.
Do you feel that you are in danger then of just becoming a consulting shop if it's just one person?
I don't think so. At Dark, we do retros every Friday. So the company sits down together and talks about what isn't going too well, what's going wrong, what's going right as well. But one of the more recent ones is we feel like we've been a couple of weeks in the fixing bugs. What are we doing with the long-term vision? How are we making sure that we follow the long-term vision? And as a result, we had to sit down and we laid out what are all the things that are missing from long-term vision that we aren't doing at the moment, to prioritize them and try to sort of set in motion make sure that we get to market ASAP, but also don't end up as a consulting shop for small people. Make sure that we would be the worst consulting shop because we're paying them.
Well, it sounds like things are going well. I have to ask, why the name Dark?
I wish I had a better story about this.
Does it involve a Lunch Darkly t-shirt?
It does. We talked about this, and I remember I said to you that it's called Dark, and you had this look on your face, and it hadn't occurred to me that it's like I don't know why you're looking at me like that, and I honestly didn't. I think that the name came from the fact that we were making editors, and I always use the dark theme in editors. But what I was looking to do at the time, I was putting together a proposal to send to a bunch of people to say, like, does this look interesting? And so I wanted something which sounded like if you saw the email with this subject, that you would open it. And so it was called Project Dark. And that sounds like a doc that you want to read. I was basically spitballing for names until I hit that, satisfied that criteria. And Dark was one of the first names I came up with.
Cool.
We liked it. And now we're darklang.com, and the company is Dark Incorporated.
Well, so you're about a year into it now?
About a year, yeah. So Ellen and I just celebrated our 1 year anniversary of being co-founders, or was it of meeting? One of those two. Aww. But we're I think we started fundraising about a year ago. It's
funny because it's Launch Darkly's 4-year anniversary.
Oh wow! Congratulations.
And when we started doing the podcast, when I started doing the podcast with you, I think we were 4 people.
You were 4 people, and you're 30 people?
50.
50 people! Holy shit, Edith!
Yeah,
That's huge.
We were 4 people sitting outside.
Yeah. And funnily enough, now that like when we started, my company was like 45.
Yeah.
And now my company is 4.
So maybe in a couple more years, I'll be talking about
You'll be starting your next one. And,
no, I like Lunch Darkly, but any surprises or takeaways you want to share?
Yeah. So there's one key surprise that was really interesting. Actually, I'll go with 2. One is that we've learned that small UI improvements have really outsized impact when you're having a product that is like the core of someone's workflow. You make a very small, seemingly insignificant change, and it just has much, much bigger impact than like the effort that goes into it. So that's one. And I think the other one is validating. Like often you want to validate with customers, and we do a lot of user testing and validating with customers. But when you're building a big thing, like you can't just give the whole thing to a customer. Mm-hmm. And so you have to rethink a lot about how you validate. And we've been doing weekly planning meetings, and in that we have a hypothesis spreadsheet. And it's like, what are the hypotheses that we're validating this week or invalidating this week? And we hypothesize that this is, this particular feature is going to solve a lot of problems, or just that we want to solve these problems and we're going to try a bunch of things to solve it and see which one sticks. And it's a really interesting validation problem. And I think it's one where most people wouldn't choose to do because like it's as a result of having a very large surface area to build, which has its pros and its cons, but it's what we're doing.
Well, that's so cool, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Edith.
I'm glad that you seem really excited about it.
Yeah, no, I love it. I'm super excited, and thanks so much for investing in it.
You're literally like bouncing with
I
excitement.
am. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
We're hiring, by the way. You should check out darklang.com/careers.
and then you get to work with Paul, and you perhaps will hear new stories before they're on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of To Be Continuous, brought to you by Heavybit and hosted by me, Paul Bigger of Circle CI, and Edith Harbaugh of Launch Darkly.
To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. While you're there, check out their library, home to great educational talks from other developer company founders and industry leaders.